In the name of God, this is session 6 of your syntax lesson. As you know, in the previous session we talked about the phrase structure rules, and then in the first step we talk about the verb phrase, and second about the noun phrase. In this session I want to talk about other phrases, adjective phrases and prepositional phrases. First, look at this example from adjective phrases. For example, Jeeves is rather envious of Poirot. You see, this is a kind of adjective phrase. The head adjective envious combined with the prepositional phrase of Poirot produce adjective one bar, a one bar. Then this a one bar combined with the specifier, rather, to produce the maximal projection, adjective phrase. This is like verb phrase and noun phrase. It shows a kind of layered structure. You see here. Again, in prepositional phrases, we can see the same structure. You see here, using the pattern adopted for VP, MP, and AP as a model, we can propose the following structure. Again, you see here, this is an example. Right across or with the bridge, or with a knife. You see here, this is example. Again, the head, the preposition like across or with, combined with the MP, the complement like the bridge or knife, to compose a P1 bar. Then this P1 bar combined with the specifier, like right here, to produce the maximal projection, prepositional phrase. Again, you see the ordering of P and the complement is not universally fixed. This is the structure of English language. Maybe in other languages we have a kind of other orders in other languages, as you see in the previous session about the Japanese, for example, language. So this is again the adjective phrase and the prepositional phrase. As you see here, they are like the verb phrases and the noun phrases. So at last we can conclude a kind of Xbar theory. From the discussion above, it appears that for all lexical categories, noun, verb, preposition, or adjective, the format of phrasal projection can be represented by means of the layered representation. Look at this, summarize the discussion. This is the verb phrase. This is, the adjective phrase, prepositional phrase, and noun phrase. You see here, we have two lines in each note. One of them, for example, is the word order of the English language. The other, for example, for Japanese language. So we draw two lines in each note. So you see here, this is, we call it Xbar theory. Okay, this X, by this X, I means, for example, any, category like, for example, noun, verb, preposition, or adjective. So we can show it like this grammar, like this diagram. This means that we no longer need 4 different phrase structure rules as suggested in previous diagrams. Abstracting away from the category of the head, we arrive at the following schema. So we can summarize all of these diagrams like verb phrase, prepositional phrase, adjective phrase, or noun phrase. Just we summarize it as a one diagram, X phrase. This X, as I told you, this X, by this X, I means, for example, noun, verb, adjective, or preposition. So we have XP, which consists of X1 bar, then the head X, where X stands, for example, for N, noun, verb, adjective, or preposition. Our grammar need not contain 4 schemata like the previous slide, but only one. The general format for phrase structure is summarized in the following XP rules. You see here, XP consists of a specifier X1 bar, then X1 bar consists of X1 bar YP, and then at last XP consists of the head X and the complement YP. For example, in English, phrases will have the structure like this one. For example, the xp consists of the specifier x1 bar, and then x1 bar consists of the head x and the complement yp. This is the word order of English language. So you see here, this is the summary of what I talked about in this session. So this is the phrase structure, rules. So now we can look at the structure of sentence in general, not NP now, VP or PP or adjective phrase. The structure of sentences. What is the structure of sentences? Inside each sentence. So they, for example, look at the example. They will wonder whether Poirot will abandon the investigation. This sentence consists of, the another sentence, you see here, whether Poirot will abandon the investigation. And this is the tree diagram of this sentence. You see here, the embedded sentence, this is some kind of sentence which composed of a kind of complementizer, whether, you see here. Then another sentence, Poirot will abandon the investigation. Again, this sentence consists of the subject, Poirot, the auxiliary will, and the VP, abandon the investigation. This is the tree diagram. But you see here there are some differences between this diagram and previous diagrams. As it stands, this representation is not an instantiation of the Xbar schema like the previous one I told you about it. If S1 bar, as the name suggests here, you see here, is a projection of S, then this is an odd projection. You see, this is a kind of odd projection. As you know, in the Xbar schema, phrasal projection project from their heads units of the type, for example, noun, verb, adjective, preposition. Heads are typically terminal node. But you see here in this diagram, the labeling suggests that S is a projection, S1 bar is a projection of S, which is not a terminal node, which is a non-terminal node, So there is some, problems here. What is, the head of the sentence? Is this S node is the head of the sentence? No. So we can, find the head of each sentence. So first of all, I want to talk about the auxiliary or tense. In the previous diagram, you see we have a kind of auxiliary here. You see here? So maybe this auxiliary is the head of the sentence, maybe. So what is auxiliary? As you know, in the previous diagram, S has three immediate constituents. The subject, Poirot, the VP, abandon the investigation, and auxiliary, will. Again, you look at the tree diagram. This sentence consists of three lines. The NP, the subject, the auxiliary will, and the VP, abandon the investigation. So, looking at the Xbar format, we can ask ourselves, first, which of these three could in principle qualify as a head? One possibility presents itself: auxiliary is a terminal node. So this observation might tempt us to adopt the hypothesis that maybe auxiliary is the head of the S. So the analysis will extend automatically to sentences containing other modal auxiliaries. For example, we have can, may, must, shall, and many, this kind of, auxiliaries, and to sentences containing the auxiliaries have, for example, or be. One problem for this proposal arises immediately. If auxiliary is the head of the sentence, then what do we do with sentences without overt auxiliary? You look at the tree diagram. You see here we have a kind of auxiliary here, will. Maybe this will or auxiliary is the head of the sentence because it's a kind of terminal node. But there are some sentences which, they do not have auxiliary. So what is the head of those sentences, if they do not have auxiliary? In all sentences, we can solve this problem by this, definition. In all sentences with or without overt auxiliary, the tense morpheme is dominated by a separate terminal node from now on labeled inflection. Okay, from now on we can use, instead of auxiliary, the word inflection. Okay, you see here in these diagrams, you see here again whether Poirot will abandon the investigation. Instead of auxiliary here, we can use inflection. Inflection shows, for example, the tense of the sentence. Will is, it has a kind of present tense, you see here. So instead of auxiliary, we can use inflection. For example, tense, which shows, tense. Look at another example. Poirot abandoned the investigation. So you see here we don't have auxiliary. So if we use inflection instead of auxiliary, we can put here ed. This is the past tense, you see here. So in this sentence we don't have auxiliary, but there is no problem because we have a kind of inflection, past inflection. So from now on we can use inflection instead of auxiliary in the tree diagram. So this is the head of the sentence, inflection, you see here. So I want to talk about first the agreement. We have proposed that there is a separate node inflection. As I told you, instead of auxiliary we can use inflection, which shows the tense, for example. As the label suggests, inflection is a node which is taken to contain all verbal inflection. For example, person, number, tense, you see here. The overt agreement, you look at the agreement in English language, the overt agreement properties of English verbs are heavily reduced. Regular verbs have in fact only two distinct forms for the present and one for the past tense. For example, in the present tense, just we can add s to the third person singular, and in the past tense we have just one form. There is no changing in the inflection of the verbs. So English, the agreement in English are heavily reduced, but just in B form, to B form, we have a kind of variation in inflection in English. For example, in the present tense, I am, you see, am, are, is, are, you see here, and the past tense was, were, you see here. We have three forms, we have two forms. Okay, so we call it agreement between the subject and the verb. Okay, so though the overt realization of agreement for person and number is restricted in English, we assume that there is abstract agreement, which is often not morphologically realized. So we propose that inflection, as you know, we use inflection instead of auxiliary, dominate not only the tense but only the agreement feature. You see here, this is the abbreviation of agreement. So the inflection node consists of two features here, tense feature and agreement feature. For example, will or ed. You see here, it's true that languages like English, for example, maybe they have restricted number of agreement, but we assume that there is abstract agreement in all languages. So we can say that inflection consists of two features, tense and agreement. So this is the feature of inflection. So we can talk about the inflection in many languages. As you know, we have some sentences which they are infinitive sentences or infinitive clauses. Tense clauses are specified as having an inflection containing the feature, as you know, tense and agreement. But infinitive typically lack tense marking and agreement. So we can put here minus tense, minus agreement. Not plus tense, plus agreement, plus the previous sentence, because this is a kind of finite sentence. if we have a kind of non-finite or infinitive clause, we can put minus tense minus agreement. But we have inflection, I mean inflectional node. We can represent here in the subordinate clause like this tree diagram. We assume that to in infinitive corresponds to the verb inflection. You see here we have a to. Look at the example. I didn't expect Poirot to abandon the investigation. This is a kind of infinitive clause, but we have a kind of inflection. But by minus tense minus agreement, to we put to, I mean, below this kind of, I mean, node, the inflection. So Poirot to abandon the investigation. We can conclude that all sentences have this kind of, I mean, node, inflection. Some of them, the finite clauses here have, I mean, plus tense and plus agreement, but in infinitive clauses like this we have minus tense minus agreement too. We put to here in this node. So this is the, I mean, difference between finite clauses and non-finite clauses. So we can, if we have inflection, I mean inflection as, if we consider inflection as the head of the, I mean, this sentence, so instead of sentence we can put inflectional phrase here. So in this, I mean, in this part I want to talk about the structure of IP. This means inflectional phrase. So we have based the distinction between finite and infinitival clauses on the content of the node infel or inflection, the feature plus or minus tense and plus or minus agreement. In other words, the type of clause is determined by the type of inflection. So tense ending will end up on V, I mean verb, auxiliaries and infinitival to are followed by a verb. Since verb heads VP, it seems reasonable to argue that I takes a VP as its complement to constitute the I projection. Then this I projection combined with the subject to produce the IP. Okay, look at the tree diagram to show you this, I mean, explanation. So we have a sentence here. You see here, Poirot will abandon the investigation, or Poirot abandoned the investigation, or Poirot to abandon the investigation. There's no difference. We have finite clause or non-finite clause. So first of all, the head, I mean the head I, inflection like will or ed or to, combined with its complement, which is a kind of verb phrase. You see here, abandon the investigation. Then when combined with VP, it produces I1 bar, I mean inflection 1 bar. Then at the second step, this I1 bar combined with the subject, I mean Poirot here, you see here, to produce the maximal projection IP, inflectional phrase. So you see here, again, we have a kind of layered structure here. First of all, the head inflection, we summarize it as a I, you see, inflection. This inflection combined with the complement VP produce a kind of I1 bar. Then this I1 bar combined with the subject, I mean Poirot, to produce the maximal projection IP or inflectional phrase. You see here in the, I mean, the phrase structure rule, we show it again here. First of all, IP from, I mean, top to the bottom. IP consists of a specifier, I mean the subject, and I1 bar. Then I1 bar composed of the head I and the complement VP. So inflection here doesn't dominate open class. What is inflection? Inflection doesn't dominate open class lexical heads. It's not, I mean, the kind of lexical head. It's a non-lexical head, or we call it functional head. This is a kind of functional head. I mean that this is not like the noun or verb or adjective, because they are a kind of lexical head. But inflection here is a kind of, I mean, functional head, non-lexical head. Projections of lexical heads are lexical projection, and projection of functional heads are functional projection. So we call it kind of functional projection. So this is the structure of sentences. Okay, the structure inside each sentence consists of this kind of layered, structure. So first of all, the head of the inflection combined with the complement verb phrase to produce a I1 bar. Then this I1 bar combined with the subject, the specifier, to produce a maximal projection IP. So as you know, as I told you, this I is a kind of inflectional head, not lexical head like noun or verb or adjective or preposition. So this is the structure of sentences. So in this session, we talk about the structure of adjective phrase, the structure of prepositional phrase, then we talk about the structure of sentences, and we conclude that each sentence consists of the head of the inflectional, which this inflection shows the tense and the agreement feature. Then it's combined with the complement to produce a I1 bar, and then at last this I1 bar combined with the subject to produce a IP. It means maximal projection. Okay, thank you for your attention. That's enough for this session, and goodbye everybody.